Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by AIO Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, welcome everyone to the Chasing Giants podcast, episode 274 on May 25th, the release date. Don, how you doing today?
I'm good, Terry. Memorial weekend, so I'm anxiously awaiting the next holiday, which is July 4th, so I can get my cameras out.
It's thank you to all who have served and fallen and the families around that. We want to make sure that that is the overwhelming takeaway from this show, is to honor those who have put us in a position to do what we need to do in a tyranny-free country for the most part. Although we got a lot of problems with this country, we're still very blessed to be in it and where we can worship and have a hunting podcast that talks about Jesus. So very thankful for those who have served and fallen, and also the families that support them. We have a very, very long list of content that we want to get across on this show today, so I hope everyone will have a nugget of peace to get away from it. We're going to talk about fawns, mowing clover and hay. Since fawns are dropping, I want to spend some time on that. I want to spend quite a bit of time on this cold weather and how that affects our crops and our different plants. We've gotten so many questions this last week to the real world side about worried about plants and they're not growing. So let's talk about the cool weather. And then finally, Don, we have talked a lot about this Farming for Nutrients initiative and thrown out a lot of products. And I don't think we've done a good job kind of explaining the differences of humic acid, biochar, Mike's Mighty Micros, and what each of them do in a system together. So maybe in the second segment out of Osseo's break, let's talk a little bit about all of those products and how they kind of complement each other for a little bit. I think it'll help people understand soil health and plant health a little bit. But diving in first, the cold weather. I mowed the yard just a little bit ago. I had to have a hoodie on. It was probably only in the low 60s. What is up with late May and cold weather?
Yeah, I've been waiting on a big warm-up to come, and it just hasn't happened yet. It not only affects plant growth, but also antler growth. And we've talked about this in past years, but, an ideal situation for antler growth is temperatures a little bit above normal and moisture, rainfall a little bit above normal. And you don't want extremes either direction, but warmer temperatures promotes blood flow in that growing velvet on a buck's head, and we just haven't had that yet this spring. It could turn off warm next week and stay warm the rest of the summer, and we could catch up to some degree. But that antler growth period it's a specific window, and you don't get a chance to make it up. And I, as a livestock farmer, you're trying to raise a steer, for example, to say he's going to finish at 1,200 pounds. Well, it doesn't really matter how long it takes him to get to 1,200 pounds. You're going to get him to 1,200 pounds. But I learned this with the captive deer, that window of time when a buck's growing his antlers, you can't stretch it out. It is what it is. And you need optimum conditions for as much of that window as possible. And, we've lost a good, 6-8 weeks here of optimal conditions. Now, we have had the moisture, and the good thing about the moisture that we've gotten is it's been steady, but it hasn't been, at least where I'm at, further south, that's not necessarily the case, but it hasn't been, torrential rains, flooding type rains, but we've had steady rain just to keep conditions wet. And what the extra moisture does is it will promote plant growth, and that new growth out on the end of the plant, whether it be alfalfa, clover, soybeans, whatever, is the most nutrient-dense part of the plant. It's also the tenders. It's what the deer eat. So you get continual rains, especially through the typically drier summer months. You get better plant growth. But if you can combine that additional moisture with warmer temperatures, that's ideal. And we had that last year. Last year, was probably the best antler growing season maybe I've seen in my entire life, but definitely in a long, long time. The previous year was one of the poorest. So who knows what this year is going to be? We got the moisture, but we don't have the warm temperatures. And again, that could change overnight, but I keep looking at the extended forecast, hoping that I'm seeing some 80s and even pushing into 90, low 90s would be good, but just I'm not seeing that yet.
Right. What specific products? I've always heard the kind of the opinion that corn likes the heat. Is that true? Let's talk about plants a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a little bit of corn coming up in my area now, but I noticed how it looks really yellow and kind of sickly, and I'm sure that's because of the temperatures. I mean, I know this is in ag fields where the farmers know what they're doing. The fertility is definitely there. The genetics on the seed side is definitely there. The only explanation for that corn being yellow is the cold temperatures. But again, that could change in a day or two. You just get that warm spell coming through. Mscanthus, you noted that before we started recording, all the messages we've been getting, and I've got them too personally, text and such, from folks that have planted Mscanthus and are not seeing it come on as quick as they would like or they expected. That's typical. There's nothing wrong. That Mscanthus rhizome is still laying there in the ground. It's probably putting on some root. It just hasn't grown as fast as it typically would in warmer conditions, but you got to be patient with that stuff. I've planted Mscanthus that the end of the first year it looked terrible. I've got a solid wall of it just 100 yards from where I'm sitting right here recording, that when I planted it, I thought I had 5% survival after that first year, and it was just slow to come on. I planted it within a switchgrass field along the edge, and it was competing with that switchgrass so bad that it just took it forever to get established. But typically we say 3 years. I bet this stuff took 5 to 7 years before it was fully established, and today it's a solid wall, and I thought I had 5% survival. So patience is the key with basically any of those native grasses. Now, Mscanthus is not a native grass, but it's one of those, it's a perennial, taller grass that is a little bit slower to fully establish. 3 years is what we typically say, but, it's the conditions that we got at the moment. And you also got to remember, we're not even at the end of May yet. I mean, right. What's today, the 24th of May? So, there's a lot of summer left for us to catch up on both antler growth and plant growth. But I'll say this, my Mscanthus is pushing 6 foot tall right now, what's already established. So, I mean, it's growing, but not to the point that we'd like to see.
Right. Okay, well, let's transition that same topic for cold weather. How's it affecting these fawns that have just dropped? Is there any concerns there we have with the cooler, wet temperatures? I saw a fawn yesterday in my backyard. I'm sure the mom dropped it in the alfalfa field right behind the house, and the little fawn came out bawling about dinner time, and then stumbled back into the tall grass. What's the cooler, moister temps play in effect with? Is it like young livestock that we have to watch or worry about?
Well, I think I know deer are a little bit different than livestock when it comes to that. I mean, God created them to be able to survive the elements, and one reason that He created the breeding season not to all happen like at once within 1 week, but is spread out over several weeks, is you get some major event that could wipe out a total generation of deer. I remember several years ago, I think it was Memorial Weekend, there was major flooding to the point where they shut down Interstate 70 by Marshall, Martinsville, Illinois. And I know a lot of newborn fawns were swept away in floodwaters and drowned. But, that lasted a few days. The water receded and more fawns were born. So, yeah, you lose some, but that spread out over a period of time. And they're created to withstand the elements. So they'll be fine with the cold temperatures.
Good, because one of the biggest dangers to fawns is first cutting of hay. And because of this wet season, we are going to have a bumper, at least in my area, a bumper first crop. The hay is so thick that the guy's getting ready to go out and mow hay here when it dries out. I think we already have some hay on the ground around here. That's probably one of the biggest dangers for fawns, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. There's probably more fawns killed every summer by people mowing, whether it be hay or whatever they happen to be mowing. And then also cutting wheat, the 1st of July, usually the tail end of June, first few days of July is when they're typically cutting wheat around here. And I know a lot of fawns get killed that way as well. But
we have a listener submitted. Yeah, we have a listener submitted question, I believe, this week about strategies with mowing their clover with the fawns. So we'll save a little bit more of this discussion for our listener submitted questions. But again, folks, for those who don't necessarily understand what's going on, walk everybody through what that mother's doing when there's a solo fawn in somebody's flower bed, or there's a solo fawn laying out in the middle of a field. It's not abandoned, is it?
No, absolutely not. And if there's twins or triplets, they don't bed down together. Again, God knew what he was doing when he created these creatures, and that doe will separate those fawns by more than 100 yards most of the time. That way, if a predator gets one, the other one typically will still survive. So you can't just assume because you see a doe nursing one fawn, that's the only one she's got. She may have another one a couple 100 yards away, and then she'll go nurse it. So that's something to keep in mind. But you see them out there; they're not abandoned. That mother's coming back, and again, it's to ensure survival. If that doe was there and a predator comes along, she's going to attract that predator's attention and draw it to that area, and it's more likely to find the fawn. So she will bed away from her fawns and separate those fawns, and it's all part of God's plan to ensure survival.
All right, well, that sounds great. Thank you for explaining that. We'll probably make a little social media reel that non-deer hunters will hear, because it never fails. There's stuff all over social every time this year, or where people find a fawn and think it's abandoned or the mother got killed and try to take it to the animal shelter. So we're going to take a break and listen to a spot from ASIA, and then come back with some very important announcements that a lot of you are going to be interested in. Not only the appearance at JB's feed here in just a few short days, but also the release of the videos from the Midwest Sportsman's Classic and the Legends Roundtable. We're going to go over that schedule of when that information, those videos and audio will be available for everyone. So make sure you grab a piece of paper if you want to take notes, and get some phone numbers, and we'll be right back after this message.
AIO Gear introduces a premium line of bow hunting gear that is unmatched, pairing nature's finest camouflage with the best technological innovations. AIO Gear brings whitetail bow hunters the gear they need to be the best at their craft. The unique camouflage mimics the intricate feather pattern of North America's greatest predatory creatures. Designed for invisibility, built for comfort, and engineered for function. Visit AIOgear.com. That's ASIO Gear.com to start shopping. AIO Gear, prepare to be invisible.
All right, we need to make an announcement about the June 3rd event at JB's in Millersburg, Ohio. That's coming right up. Basically about a week after folks will be hearing this. So that event starts at 6:30, and then there'll be a question and answer session later. I got a special message that I'll be delivering starting at 6:30, and when I get done, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. You got questions about politics, religion, deer hunting, whatever, bring it on.
Marriage counseling. Don't forget your marriage counseling.
Well, I only do marriage counseling by phone, Terry, because I don't want to have some lady hit me up the side of the head with a frying pan or something. So I had a friend at church last week, Jordan. Hopefully he's listening. His wife actually just got baptized last Sunday, so congratulations to her. But he said he told his wife that I do marriage counseling, and I said, yeah, but only by phone, only by phone. I don't want to be between them. So if you got marriage counseling questions, you're going to have to call me with them.
All right, well, let's give the number for JB's. Make sure you call ahead so he can plan to accommodate. There is limited seating in it. The number is 330-893-3686. 3684. Let them know you're coming. And then let's move on and talk about the Midwest Sportsman's Classic. You know, for those who didn't get to make it to the Shipshewana show, there has been a lot of questions of if those kind of breakouts with the Legends Roundtable would be available. And we know that we have a lot of people from different paths and walks of life that want to watch or listen to this. So I'm going to try to explain it the best I can, and if I screw it up, Don, you jump in and correct me. But starting next week, the June 1st, the June 8th, and the June 15th, we are going to put the audio version of these seminars at the end of the Chasing Giants podcast audio platforms. What this is going to let everybody do that listens to the podcast on a call-in service that doesn't have access to YouTube is they can basically listen to a second hour to hear Joe Miles, Bobby Worthington, the Wensels, Al Foster, and Don each episode. So think of it as if you call in on Tech, you can listen to the Chasing Giants podcast, and then at the end of the Sunday night prayer time, you will be able to listen to one of the episodes from this Midwest Sportsman's Classic. For those who watch on YouTube, we are going to release the video version of this midweek, so probably on Tuesday or Thursday. So that would be like June 3rd or 5th, somewhere in there. We will release the video version of that same seminar on the Chasing Giants YouTube channel. So the audio will go out at the end of the podcast. The video will release midweek. So we hope that helps get the information out to everybody. So the week of June 1st will be the return, the old school days of woodsmanship with Joe Miles and Bobby Worthington. The week of the 8th will be Campfire Stories with the Wenzel brothers. And then the week of June 15th will be Chasing Elusive Giants in Farm Country by Don and Al Foster. So, Don, did I explain that okay, or miss something, or say it wrong?
I think you did a fantastic job, Terry.
All right. So, audio people, it will be at the conclusion of the podcast. Video people, it will release midweek on the Chasing Giants YouTube channel, where we have a lot of content going out every week. This past week, we had Don planting soybeans. We had complete feed and big timber, so there's constant information going out. I think this coming week we got corn planting and spraying videos coming out, so make sure you're checking those all out. Let's transition and talk about soil health, buddy. We have been talking so much about farming for nutrients. I said kind of a statement last week about nutrition in every bite, and that starts a lot with soil health. It starts with plant health, and then it ends up with herd health. So Josh Anderson told me this last week. He goes, when you have a healthy doe, you have a healthy fawn, which you have a healthy buck, and then you have a happy hunter. And I think that's a good way of saying all of it all together. But the foundation of where we want to start everything with our plots this year is within that soil. And I think it's important as we start throwing out products that are available to increase the soil health to start the trickle-out effect. Let's talk a little bit about how those individual products work, what they're designed to do, what to look for when you're searching for them, because I think there's different types of, say, like biochar out there. So walk us through a little bit of the foundations of the soil health that we're talking about and the products involved in it.
Yeah, to get the most nutrient-rich plants, there's two ways to go about it, and you got to do both. One is the seed that you're planting, the variety of seed. Some varieties of corn, for example, NutriCrave corn, are going to have more nutrients than other varieties. They may not yield as many bushels per acre, but the bushels you do get will be more nutrient dense. Starts with the soil. One thing that we've really seen with the NutriCrave corn, and Dwayne and I were talking about this the other day, the analysis of that corn varies greatly, and it's all got to do with the growing conditions that it's grown in, the soil it's grown in, and the timely rains it gets and such. But we've seen some pretty big fluctuations with NutriCrave corn. Jeremy Sluter, our distributor out in Kansas with Phillips Seed Farm, grew some last year, and I think it was under irrigation. I can't swear to it, but I think it was under irrigation, and it had some of the best analysis of any that we had last year, and probably did have the best that anybody had last year. But it just goes to show how important the soil and the growing conditions are. The genetics of the seed can be exactly the same, but the soil can make a huge difference. And that's why I personally, and we as a group, have become so interested in soil amendment products and the Mike's Mighty Micros as well. That's more applied to the plant itself. But two of the products that I've been using for 2 to 3 years now is Biochar and the humic acid, and they do similar things, but they're totally different products. And I'm going to give a little bit of history, and I've taken some notes here, folks. I'm no expert on this. I'm learning all this as I go. Mike Mitchell there with Mike's Mighty Micros has taught me a lot, but I got on the internet and I did some research because I want to be able to talk with facts and not just opinions here. And so, let's start with humic acid. And what is humic acid? Well, the best way I heard humic acid described is humic acid is coal before it becomes coal. So it's formed underground where plant material is under great pressure and heat. And that's basically what makes coal. And if you look at humic acid, if you take a handful of it, those little nuggets of it, it almost looks like little chunks of coal. You know how a chunk of coal is not round. It's got like flat sides on it, almost, I wouldn't call it square or cube, but it's got flatter sides, and those little chunks of humic look the same way. So humic is formed underground from plant material under pressure and heat, and it's mined, from underground. So I'm going to give you some of the benefits of it. So first of all, it boosts the organic matter in your soil. Being made from plant material, it's going to increase your organic matter. It enhances soil structure and aeration. So you got a tight soil, like let's say clay, you mix some humic in with that, and it kind of aerates that soil and allows the roots of that plant to grow better. It regulates soil pH. So, it keeps your pH from getting too acidic or too alkaline. Probably the biggest benefit, and the one that I'm really leaning on my own property, is nutrient uptake. So nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, whatever, will adhere to that granule of humic. And when you apply that humic, I apply it, with a broadcast spreader on top of the ground, and then I disc it in. And if you guys have been watching the recent Chasing Giants TV videos, I've talked about that some, where I broadcast that on the ground and I disc it in, and I'm trying to get away from that work in the soil each year and going more to no-till. But before I completely go no-till, I want to make sure that I've got these soil amendments worked into the soil and not just sitting there on the top, because this humic needs to be down in that first few inches of the soil where the plant's roots can best utilize it. So if you think about it, you go and apply a granular fertilizer to your plot. Well, that fertilizer is going to dissolve. Rain, whatever, is going to dissolve that, and it's going to work its way down into the soil as it dissolves. Well, it will continue working its way down through the soil or washed off the top of the soil by rain. That's a process that just continues. However, if that nutrient adheres to that humic in the top first few inches of the soil, it holds it there, so it stays there where the plant can utilize it in that root zone of the plant, instead of leaching away where the plant cannot utilize it. So that's the biggest reason that I'm using it, to hold that. I mean, you could actually cut your fertilizer cost, because your fertilizer just becomes so much more efficient by being held right there in the root zone instead of leaching away. So it enhances nutrient availability that way. It also helps with water absorption. So during drought periods, it'll help hold moisture. It'll absorb moisture just as well as it does the nutrients. It impacts plant root development. So, it makes that soil more porous or more loose, where it doesn't bind together tight, and the roots of your plant can grow in there a whole lot better and easier. It increases microbial activity in the soil. How that happens, I'm not sure, but that's just one of the benefits that I got off the internet here. It's good for organic farming because, if you're using like all natural fertilizer, manure or whatever, I mean, that manure breaks down. There's decaying vegetative matter, it forms nitrogen, and it'll hold it right there at a level where the plant can utilize it. Just a lot of different benefits there. To apply humic, you only need about 200 to 300 pounds per acre, and you need to apply that every 2 to 3 years. I'm doing like 250 pounds every other year on my plots. The way I'm applying it is I'm using my pH drill, and I'm filling that drill with the humic. I'm cranking the gearbox wide open so it's turning as fast as it can, and then I'm cranking the gate opening open, and by doing that I'm putting that down into the soil instead of right on the surface. You could also, if you don't have the drill, you could broadcast it and work it into the soil as well, but it's one that needs to be reapplied about every 2 to 3 years because that material is going to break down. It's just plant material that's formed into little granules, I guess is the best way to put it. So they're going to break down over time, so you need to reapply it. Biochar, on the other hand, talk about biochar a little bit, totally different. So the way biochar was discovered, at least the story that I heard, was that the rainforest in South America, they noticed when they would fly over these rainforests, there was pockets of really good dense vegetation. It just appeared that in these pockets the soil was so much better than what surrounded it. The surrounding area would be there'd be vegetation there, but it wasn't near as lush and green as the rest. They checked did soil samples and such, and what they found was, decades ago when the natives were clearing plots for growing their food, they were burning these trees and such. And a lot of that material got buried into the soil. And so that was causing a lot of the same benefits that we see with humic. So the biochar is basically product wood or manure, plant-based material that has been burned in a low oxygen environment, and there's a name for it. It's called pyrolysis or something like that. Pyrolysis, pyrolysis. And anyway, it's being burnt, but it's in a very low oxygen environment. And I don't know how they do it, but they got big machines that process this stuff. But each one of those granules totally different than the humic, because each one of those is like a little sponge, and it's got crevices and such within it. And I got an interesting figure here. So where's it at? So if you had 1 gram of biochar, and 1 gram ain't much, I mean, not even a handful, it's got enough surface area in that 1 little gram. There's enough surface area to cover half of a football field. So, I mean, a gram is not even an ounce. I mean, we're talking a little tiny portion, but all those little crevices within those little nuggets would cover half of a football field. So if you think of each one of those as a little sponge, they will also attract nutrients. It's almost like a magnet that it pulls these nutrients in and holds them, but it does the same thing with water and moisture. So basically a lot of the same benefits, but it works in a totally different way. And the great thing about biochar is you only have to apply it 1 time, and it lasts in your soil for hundreds of years. So do it once and you're done. But you do need a whole lot more of it. You need between 1,000 and 2,000 pounds per acre. So I know Green Prairie has started selling it in 1-ton totes. So, basically about a tote per acre is what you want to apply that. You need to work it into the soil. I have never applied it through my pH drill. I suppose you could. It's just something that I've never tried because it's a lot finer.
So much. It'd be a lot of trips over it with a drill.
Yeah, exactly. And the stuff is so fine, it's almost powdery. It's like if you just took charcoal and you beat it to death with a hammer and made it into powder, That's kind of what this stuff is like, real tiny particles. But there's different qualities of biochar depending on what it's made out of. I mean, I know there's one facility that makes it out of old pallets. They burn old pallets in this special mill or whatever, or burn chamber, and it makes biochar. So some of the first biochar I used a couple of years ago, it had bigger chunks in it, and it just looked like basically, a fire pit. Like you'd burnt your wood, some wood in a fire pit, and the black pieces that were left. The stuff that we're using today and that Green Prairie is selling, it is made from straight chicken manure. So in these big chicken houses where these layers are in pens or in cages, and under the cages is nothing but solid manure, there's no or almost no bedding material or sawdust or wood shavings in this when it's made. It's basically that straight dried chicken manure gets run through this incinerator in a low oxygen environment. And it's a much higher quality because it's got so many more minerals and nutrients in it when you start. It's also like applying fertilizer at the same time. So that's kind of the story on biochar versus humic. I apply both just because they're different. I think that they can work in different ways or to different degrees for some of these different benefits. And the big thing is, the two big takeaways for me on my property and my types of soil are it's holding those nutrients where the plants can utilize it, and it's also holding moisture for those drought type conditions. But if you've got poor soil, I mean, we get a lot of questions from food plotters that talk about their poor soil. It's either sandy or it's clay or whatever, and what can I do? There's a lot of things you can do. I mean, cover crops is a great thing, but these soil amendments, applying them at their maximum rate and working them in, even making multiple applications, will make a big difference in those situations.
So there's a couple things I want to make sure people understand. Biochar, from what I understand, is already broken down as far as it's ever going to break down. So you don't have a situation with it building up heat if it's mixed with anything or sets anywhere. Humic acid, on the other hand, you can get in a little bit of trouble trying to mix some fertilizers with it and broadcasting it gets hot, turns into clay. So just make sure you do your research on it. The second thing is not all biochars are created equal. Like you said, some of it is just burnt wood. What we're really focusing on is the biochar that is made from poultry litter and with a minimum bedding. That's the key. That it's going to, by investing in this, the long-term cost savings of fertilizer applications is going to work itself out, not to mention the long-term benefits of your soil.
Yeah, my goal on my farm is to eliminate those fertilizer applications.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to do that by, amending my soil with both humic and biochar, and by the use of cover crops.
Right.
The big thing, like today, my fertilizer is basically nitrogen for my corn. And I'm going to try to get away from that, even using hairy vetch as a cover crop, the planted to fall ahead of the corn. Hairy vetch is a legume. It's what they use in organic farms to provide nitrogen for their corn where they don't want to apply a synthetic fertilizer. So my plan is to eventually get totally away from synthetic fertilizers. And also I really want to cut and hopefully eliminate, but I'm not sure if I'm ever going to be able to eliminate it, but at least cut the amount of herbicides that I'm using as well.
Right. Well, I think that for us food plotters, this is just fascinating. For a row crop farmer that's farming big acres, this is probably making them cringe putting this much product down on the ground. But for food plotters, very manageable as far as investment and cost compared to fertilizers. But also, everybody who's got a garden out back, the combination of these two products with Mike's Mighty Micros after the plant leaf material comes up, if you're face it, we're all just getting so scared of the amount of synthetic herbicide or synthetic fertilizers and herbicides, pesticides that we're taking in, trying to eat healthier, raising not only the best tasting but the healthiest vegetables in our gardens. You guys, this is where it's at for you guys doing all organic, or the people that are trying to raise the healthiest garden in the backyard. Reach out to us on this stuff. We think we can give you some very, very good solutions through our friends at Mike's Mighty Micros or through Green Prairie. All of this kind of plays into the grand scheme of us being healthier, but also our deer herd also.
Yeah, and I think one of the big benefits and why I went this direction is I live in a state where I cannot supplemental feed. I cannot put out supplemental minerals. So the nutrition that I provide my deer has to come from a plant source. Whether it's an agriculture field or my food plots or whatever. In the wintertime, I've got a lot of deer wintering on my farm. All the ag fields around me have been turned under by that time, and the deer are feeding heavily in my plots. And this gives me an opportunity to set those deer up for the following antler growing season. So these bucks come from miles around to winter on my farm, and I want to make sure every day when they go to eat in my food plots, they're getting the most nutrient-dense foods they possibly can. And I'm doing that through my soil and through the specific plant varieties that I'm planting. NutriCrave corn, for example, you probably heard me say this before, but it will have more than double the calories of your typical ag corn. So a buck on my farm gets out of his bed in the afternoon, he heads to my food plot and feeds in my corn. If he eats say a quarter pound of NutriCrave corn, he's getting more than double the calories that if he would have ate a quarter pound of an ag corn. And that just sets him up for success the following antler growing season. And that's what got me started on this kick. But now I'm seeing a lot of other benefits as well, less chemical, less fertilizer. So I'm going to continue down that road and share what I learn as I do. But I would encourage you, if you have any interest, get on the internet, do a search for biochar, do a search for humic acid. And by the way, humic acid is really not an acid. It's just a granular product. So probably I should throw that out. But just do a search and you'll learn a whole lot more than you can by me talking.
Yeah, I would also recommend, there's a podcast out there that Josh Pretzer has out in Kansas, Singular Agronomics, maybe, I think. I'm sorry, Josh, if I butchered. I know it's Singular something. I think it's Agronomics, but if you're into nerding out on soil health, he is your guy. By all means, look that up if you're interested in learning more about this. So I want to make a quick announcement. Are we done with that? Are we good?
I got one more thing I want to throw out. We talked about our biochar is made from pure poultry manure instead of the bedding material. On the humic acid side, I talked about it's being mined out of the ground. It comes in different, I don't know what the word is. Some of it's better than others. So it depends on what mine you're getting it from. Some of those mines, the humic has a high salt content. We're getting ours out of Canada. It's the best humic probably on the planet. But it's a whole lot better than some of these other, the quality is so much better than some of these other mines. So be careful where you're getting your humic.
Yeah. Okay. So we're coming very, very close to the spin-off second podcast under the Chasing Giants kind of company umbrella called Chasing Assurance Podcast. And we've talked somewhat about this. I'm going to take a section of this podcast and actually play a couple of the promotional videos in the intro for you guys to see, and then come back and talk just a little bit about it before we move on to the Higgins hot seat section. So I hope you enjoy this.
That's what this book, this holy, sacred book is about. God's spoken. He has revealed himself. So when a question of faith comes up, we ought to go to the Bible. When a question of morality comes up, we ought to go to the Bible. When a question of fellowship comes up, we ought to go to the Bible, because it's there in this inspired, infallible, inerrant book that we have an authoritative voice from heaven.
If that name rings a bell or you recognize that name is our good friend Brent Henderson, who volunteered some time to do some voiceovers for us. And then my friend Luke McCoy out in Iowa did the video editing. So such a super job. We're very excited about it. Folks, this is how I'm working with tech right now to make sure that we have our own extension for this podcast. Obviously, the video will air on the Chasing Giants YouTube channel. and the podcast itself will be on all the major platforms, but we're working very hard to get it on tech for all of you guys that want to listen on the call-in services. So I want to give a quick shout out. There's two special friends and companies that have started to make this a reality. The Heartwood Planning Group, which is my personal financial advisor. One of the partners there is Dan Pfeiffer, who's also on Chasing Giants TV. They are the presenting sponsor of the Chasing Assurance podcast. Faith-based recommendations of how to invest and spend your money is extremely important to my wife and I, not only with our personal retirement, but also with our company. I actually turned all of my company's retirement over to them as well. But also our friends Austin and Ann Razor, who just had a baby this week. I don't know if you saw that on social media, Don, but their little son was born. Everybody's healthy. I was a little disappointed they didn't name him Terry, but I'm still going to call him Terry anyway. That's going to be his nickname from me. But
congratulations to Austin and
Terry Donald Razor.
President.
I don't know what's wrong with that name.
Well, I think it should be Donald Terry, but I guess they're going to just have to have a couple more kids.
Yeah, I guess. So they're actually going to sponsor with the Coonless Feeder the Lester's Feet segment. And that's one of the things that I'm very excited about. Is one of the things that many of our listeners have been asking about is kind of a prayer list or an update about the families that we're helping. And we found kind of I don't want to call it a gray area, but a way that we can, without breaking privacy laws, talk a little bit about the families that we're helping with Lester's Feet as a segment of that podcast. So every week, Dad's obviously going to have, more of a spiritual, religious content. I saw his outlines for the first episode. It's just phenomenal. I'm going to sit back and just learn like all of you all, to be honest with you. But we're also going to have a segment where we talk and ask for prayers for these families that you all are helping raise the money to help, which I think is going to be really, really special. We're trying to figure out a way that our friend Emerson Day can provide some music for those segments. So just so exciting to see all that. But thank you to Coonless Feeders and the Heartwood Planning Group for stepping up and actually sponsoring the show and helping fund it. We're still a little bit short of how we want to market and promote it. So if you're looking for a way to advertise inside of the Christian conservative community, please reach out to me. I will definitely be interested in talking with you about it. But excited about that. That's coming up Father's Day week. And let's go to the 360 Hunting Blinds Higgins hot seat, Don. And this is an easy question for you this week. I'm not going to put you on too much of a spot. What is the most out of the box or creative or good story related to you saving a fawn? In all the history of farming or things that you've done, what is one thing that comes to mind as far as what you've done to save a specific or just save your fawns?
Well, I thought you said this was going to be easy. Yes. So I've got a field on my farm that I was cutting in hay for several years, and it never failed. There was always fawns in that field, and I think I only hit one fawn in all the time that I was cutting. And basically, I would try to cut it that first cutting before they actually had the fawns, but sometimes weather like this year would not allow that to happen, and there'd be fawns on the ground. So I would do anything I could to keep from hitting those fawns. I would walk the field in front of and before cutting. If I seen a fawn, a lot of times they'll get up and they'll run just a short distance, like maybe 20 yards, and drop back down. And more than once, I've got off the tractor and picked up a fawn and took it over to the edge of the field and set it down. So I guess that would be the answer to that question.
Have you ever given up a hay crop just so you wouldn't hit fawns? Or cutting?
I've never went to that extreme. Just I needed the hay, so I had to cut it.
Just find ways not to try to hit them, right?
Yeah. Well,
and
we
all
got
the
a
acres
question
of hay
coming
that
up.
you've mowed there, that's only hitting one. That's a good.
Yeah. Well, that's one too many, but I think we got a question coming up about mowing and fawns, so maybe we'll get into that a little bit deeper.
All right, well, we'll move on to the Midwest Land Group. I want you guys to make sure you're following Midwest Land Group on social media. They have been investing and expanding drastically across the Midwest, coming into states like Kentucky, Ohio, Mississippi, Alabama. Not only if you're looking for property, but you're looking for a career. This is the perfect example of a faith-based conservative company that does it the right way. Our good friend Brian Kraft really sets a high standard for who joins the team. And if you're wanting to partner with a good long-term career in real estate in some of these states that are being expanded into, reach out to Midwest Land Group, who sponsors our listener-submitted questions every week. We'll be right back with the first question.
Don't risk your most valuable asset with a part-time agent. Most real estate agents are part-time, working another job, trying to scratch together a few extra bucks in real estate as a side gig. Their inexperience will cost you thousands at closing. Not at Midwest Land Group. They only hire full-time professionals. Their agents are passionate about the outdoors, highly trained, and committed to maximizing the value of your land. If you're interested in selling your land, don't risk it with a part-time agent. Visit MidwestLandGroup.com.
All right, the first question comes from Troy Carper from Memphis, Missouri. It says, Don and Terry, thanks for sharing your experience and knowledge. I look forward to the podcast each Monday on my morning commute. My question is this. I recently helped a buddy make his own waxed dirt for trapping. It got me thinking, could a person create a waxed dirt with doe and buck urine for mock scrapes? Would this technique hold the scent longer than bare dirt? Have you heard or tried this technique before? Thanks and God bless. Troy, yeah, there was a product called deer dirt years ago that is exactly what you talked about. It was made by a trapper, and before he would wax that dirt for his trap sets, he would also make some for mock scrapes. And he was basically putting deer urine in with the dirt, and then he was treating it with the wax to make it waterproof. It worked fantastic. So it's been done before. I think it's a great idea. In fact, that deer dirt, rights to deer dirt were sold to Code Blue, and they market it as Grave Digger. So that's, if you've seen the Grave Digger scent product from Code Blue, that's exactly what it is. So great idea, and definitely works.
The first time I ever came onto your farm, we actually talked about this. We were walking around the backside of your sanctuary looking at scrapes, and you, myself, and I think Patrick and Brian were all talking about how we could package scrape dirt, because you had captive deer at that point, and using the scrape dirt from the pens to actually market it, but couldn't ever figure out a way to do it without synthetic being involved.
Yeah, back when I had those captive deer, I'd have, a buck pen with all the bucks in it. And of course, in the fall, we'd have to tranquilize them and cut their antlers off, or they'd kill each other, all locked together in a pen. But they would always have a scrape, just like wild deer. But there was so many bucks that in such a tight area that they would all pee in the same scrape. And it didn't even matter if it was a drought. That scrape was always muddy from all the pee. And I got the idea, and I actually did this numerous times, is I'd go out there with Ziploc baggies and a garden trowel, and I'd bag up that mud, and then I'd go out to wild deer scrapes, and I'd pour that in it, and man, they would just tear that up. So a little bit off topic of the question, but it's got kind of in the same line, but that idea, that definitely would work.
Yeah. All right, here's the question we've been referring to about mowing the clover.
Yeah, this one comes from Matt Kendall from Troy, Ohio. It says, hey, Don and Terry, on a recent podcast, you said, mow your clover, people. My question is about the timing of mowing. I am in Ohio and mowed yesterday, May 21st. I sent you a video on Messenger. In the video, you will see a fawn bedded in the clover. You will also notice that the clover is over a foot tall and definitely needed mowed. I actually saw 2 newborn fawns while mowing. They weren't twins. They were 600 yards apart. I think we talked about this. They might still been twins, Matt. Would you wait until June to mow, or should I hire a DEI contractor to mow it? I just mow very slow and very carefully. One last question. With all the amazing things that Trump is accomplishing, why is the far left still trying to find fault in everything he does? Do you think they hate America or just Trump? I have learned so much from your podcast. Thanks for all you do. Boy, there's a lot to unravel right there. So you might have to throw that question back up before I'm done here, Terry. But anyway, on the mowing part, do I wait till June? No, there's going to be fawns born clear through the month of June and even into July. So waiting is not going to do you much good. It's just going to allow your clover to get taller and the weeds to get taller around it within it, and it's going to be harder to see those fawns. So what I do, so I've got two tractors. I've got a 115 horse big cab tractor that I plant my food plots with and such. And then I've got a small 30 horse open cab tractor that is a lot smaller. I'm sitting a lot closer to the ground. So I'm getting ready later today, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to mow a clover patch. Now this will be the second time that it's been mowed, so it's not all that tall, but it was pretty tall when I mowed it the first time, and some of that clover got bent over and not mowed real good like it should have. So I'm going to go clean that plot up, and I'm going to use my smaller tractor. It's going to take me longer because I've got a 6-foot finish mower behind it versus a 10-foot mower that I pull behind, my bigger tractor. But what I'm doing is I'm going, I'm making a circular pattern to start around the edge of the plot and work my way in towards the middle as I go around. But as I'm mowing, I'm not looking in front of me. I'm looking to the side, to the path I'm going to make on my next round. And I just get a whole lot better view. Instead of trying to look over the hood of the tractor and in front of me, it's almost impossible to see a fawn that way. I'm looking to the side where my next pass is going to be. And that's where I'm looking for those fawns. But that's what I'd suggest you do. But waiting is not going to prevent you from hitting fawns, because there's just going to be more fawns born later. I'm not sure what DEI mowing has to do, what diversity, inclusion, something else. Anyway, I don't get that part of it. I'm guessing that's some kind of a joke. But as far as Trump, your question on Trump, why does the left hate him so bad? I really think that it's what we're seeing is a battle of good and evil. And I think that these people, I don't think they do hate Trump. I'm not sure if they necessarily hate America, but I think they just have a warped evil mind. They don't think like us conservatives do, especially us Christian conservatives. I think they lack empathy. I think they lack the ability to reason sometimes. I mean, a perfect example is we've got this Doge, Elon Musk, finding billions of dollars of waste. Who would be against uncovering this waste? But yet they are. And I just don't think they have the ability to reason. I think they are so warped with evil ideas that their minds just don't work like the rest of our minds work. And I think it's a battle of good and evil. We know without a doubt God is real, but so's Satan. Satan is alive and well, and just as God works in some of us, Satan works through some of us as well. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. Depending on how big, back to the clover question, depending on how big the plot is, if it's a smaller plot, would you walk it?
Oh, absolutely. And if the clover is really thick, I'd walk it too. But I think by looking to the side and instead of ahead, you'll be able to see a whole lot more fawns. But it can be so thick that you don't even see them until you're standing right over them. So absolutely, if it's a small plot, walk it.
Yep. All right. I'll get the next question up here for you.
Or just hunt the right winds and hope a random target buck shows up. Thank you for your answer. Well, Larry, the way I use them personally is probably different than most people, and I might have opportunities that most people don't have because I've got permission on a lot of different smaller tracts of ground, and I'm not going to spend time hunting a property unless I absolutely know there's a shooter buck there. Now, occasionally, if I don't have a shooter buck somewhere, I will spend time on a property just to get video footage, and maybe there's some younger bucks that I think have potential. I want to get some video footage to tell the story later or something like that. But if I'm on a serious hunt, I know that there's a shooter buck on that property, and I learned that through my trail camera. So, small properties. A lot of our listeners just have small properties to hunt, and they they don't have multiple properties to hunt. So how do I go about hunting a situation like that? Well, first of all, if I've got one small property to hunt, I'm going to set that property up with stands already in place. I'm not going to wait till a buck shows up and then go in there and hang my stands. I want to get all that human disturbance taken care of well before I go in to hunt. So I've got my stand set up. I got good access to every stand. I know the wind direction I want to hunt every stand. And then once that property is set up to hunt, I will then run trail cameras during the season, actually before the season, but especially during the season, so that I know when a target buck happens to be there. And once that I've got that picture, once I've got confirmation there's a buck that I would shoot on the property or utilizing the property to some degree, that's when I'll start hunting, but only when the conditions allow me to hunt a specific stand with minimal chance of being detected. So just because I'm off work on Saturday doesn't mean I'm going to hunt Saturday if conditions aren't right. I'm waiting for things to be right, and I'm really increasing my odds that way, but I'm also not burning out my stands or burning out my property. The smaller the property you hunt, the more critical things like human intrusion, stand access, wind direction become. Bigger properties, you can get away with some things that you'll never get away with on a small property. You'll just bump the buck off and he'll never be back in daylight. So you just need to be more careful on those smaller properties, and that's how I go about it.
Okay. We'll share the next one as I'm putting this up. It never fails. We get a question from one of our consulting clients while we're recording. I got one of my guys with a logger on site right now wanting to know where a TSI area is. So I'm trying to text him an Onyx link while we're recording right now. So Isaac Kramer, you get a shout out on this week's podcast, buddy.
Just cut it all hard, Isaac. Cut it all hard.
Cut it all hard.
This question comes from Chris Tart from Preston, Minnesota. It says, Don, apologies if this has been asked before, but wondering if Mscanthus can winter kill. My established stands of screen do not seem to be coming back this year. Crossing my fingers, it's still on its way, but normally has taken off by now. Southeast Minnesota last winter had harsh temps and not much snow cover. Appreciate you guys in the podcast. Thanks, Chris Tart. Chris, you described the situation in which Mscanthus can winter kill. It's really critical. Typically, if it's going to winter kill, it's going to happen the first year after planting when it's not well established yet. Those roots are still growing and that clump hasn't fully formed. Typically, what will happen is the leaf and the material from that plant in the fall is going to dry down, and some of that is going to fall and create a layer of insulation on the ground to protect that plant to some degree. Snow cover is also a good insulation for the ground. If you're going to lose it, typically it's going to be a situation just like you described where it gets really cold and there's no insulation whatsoever. If you're planting Mscanthus in a real northerly region, say, northern Minnesota or whatever, I would advise that first winter or that first fall you go in before winter and you put a layer of straw as insulation over the top of that planting just to help insulate it. But yes, it can winter kill in, extreme situations just like you described.
The older it gets, the stronger it is, though. So when he mentioned that it's an established, hopefully this isn't a winter kill situation. This is just a soil temperature hasn't warmed up enough to shoot those things out of dormancy. So either way, I don't know that there's a lot you can do at this point about it other than just sit and wait.
Right.
The anxiety is probably what gets us going the most and what we try to do with our plots and our screens. But yeah, just sit back and wait and see when that soil temperature gets up and see what it does.
Mm-hmm.
All right, last question of the episode.
So this one comes from Darren Kent from Quincy. Planting on a pipeline right-of-way of about 8 acres. Unlike CRP, I have some flexibility in what I plant. I am torn between real-world switchgrass or bedding in a bag. The area will occasionally flood, but water typically recedes in a day or two. My goal is to establish cover as quickly as possible, but want to plant the best product for long-term success. When do you plant straight switchgrass versus bedding in a bag? Darren, that's a question we get occasionally. Been trying to educate people on this for a few years now. So bedding in a bag includes 3 species. It's got Indian grass, big blue stem, and switchgrass. The switchgrass in the bedding in a bag is the same switchgrass as the real world straight switchgrass that we sell. The switchgrass, of those 3 grasses, switchgrass is the one that can tolerate flooding conditions. I know a situation not far from my home where this variety of switchgrass is planted in a river bottom, and I've seen that river bottom be under 6 feet of water for over a week, and when the water recedes, that switchgrass comes right back. So the real world switchgrass will absolutely tolerate flooding. I'm not saying it can't be flooded out, I'm sure it can, but it will tolerate wet feet, wet conditions. The Indian grass and big blue stem, on the other hand, will not. It's better for an upland site. In fact, the only way anymore that I would plant the bedding in a bag is on an upland site, a CRP type planting where you're required to plant the 3 species. A lot of those CRP contracts and the personnel that oversee those contracts do not like a monoculture of one species. They want diversity, and it fits in really good there. Of the 3 grasses in the bedding in a bag, switchgrass is the one that gets the tallest and has the best standability. So I promise you, if you had a 10-acre upland field and you planted half of it in switchgrass, half of it in bedding in a bag, 5 years down the road, you're going to be much happier with the stand of straight switchgrass. All 3 of those species have various varieties. So there's, like more than a dozen varieties of switchgrass, more than a dozen varieties of big blue stem, more than a dozen varieties of Indian grass. And what we did was we planted every variety of those species we could get our hands on, and we selected the one of each species that stood the best. So the Indian grass that we use is the Indian grass that stood the best in our trials. The big blue stem is the big blue stem variety that stood the best in our trials. So we did everything we could to have the best standability, but even at that, the switchgrass is going to stand better than the big blue stem and the Indian grass.
Okay. Great questions. It's a lot of money to invest to put the wrong product in the wrong place. So great question. I'd rather people ask than do something wrong. So again, thanks for everybody's support. We appreciate it. Starting next week at the conclusion of the podcast, the audio folks will listen to the Midwest Sportsman's Classic Shipshawana audio, and the video will be played during the week with our other content. And we got Sunday night prayer time. It sounds like there was a mix-up in the schedule. I got a text a little bit ago from our friend Daryl Monk, who got mixed up on his weeks, and he's on vacation. So I think what I'll do this week is play a little excerpt of my dad on a podcast so everybody can kind of get a little bit of taste of what they're up for with the Chasing Assurance podcast for this week's prayer time. Other than that, Don, hope you have a good week.
Happy Memorial Day, everyone. God bless. See you back here next week.
Take care.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by AIO Camo. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.
In a world full of doubts, faith isn't a guess. It's the assurance of what we hope for, the conviction of what we can't yet see. Terry Peer and his father, Dr. Terry Peer, bring over 50 years of ministry experience to help you trust the promises of Jesus and live out your faith with confidence. For those chasing something more, something real, something lasting, welcome to the Chasing Assurance Podcast.
With this opening question, we'll probably visit that verse, but what is the origin of the Bible?
Well, that's really where the questions need to begin. And I wish more and more people would give real, personal, and honest consideration to that. Because if we would stop to think about, so what is this book? What makes it unique? Is it just another book on our bookshelves at the house? I mean, most homes have one someplace. Maybe it's stuck away, but most folks I know have a copy of the Bible, but if we would intentionally stop and just weigh, where does this book come from? Is it any different than any other book that's a novel or fiction or history, or is it the same as all others? Is it written by just ordinary human people, or is there something unique and special about it? And that is a huge, huge question that I wish more folks would honestly take serious. There's something that maybe this will preface and open up our discussion a little bit, but we approach this book on our shelf or on our coffee table, wherever it is, with, I believe, a predisposition, an attitude of it is either unique, it has heavenly origins, or it's just a book of men. And I believe anyone who picks up the Bible is going to start from one of those two positions. And that's that mindset that we all will approach it with, one or the other. That mindset is really going to have a huge bearing on how we view the Bible and how we read the Bible when we open up its pages, from the very first page to the very last page. So what a great question. What is the origin of the Bible? And I'd like to offer just a little thought that in preparation for this about where this begins. Since every one of us, every listener, every viewer is going to approach the Bible from a beginning predisposition. I'm going to approach the Bible with this first thought. God is. There is a God. He is the creator. He is the all-powerful, eternal being who is the one who designed us and created us. So I'm beginning with that position that God is. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not going to make excuses or dodge that or dance around that. I'm coming from the perspective that God is. Not only that God is, but God acts. Some people have this view of God that he's just this, force, impersonal, out there somewhere in the universe or the cosmos, and just has no connection to us. The God who is our God, the God who is revealed in the scripture, is a God who acts, but not just that he acts, he speaks. And I want to come back to something that happened here at Glen Estee just in the last month or so. Tanner actually preached a series of messages on the creation, the God who made us, and it was just such an excellent thing. But one thing that came to mind out of that series that I just appreciated so very much is that since God is our creator, God has created us, human beings, like in Genesis 1:26 and 27, he created us for relationship. God is relational. He wants a relationship with us. And the whole message of the Bible is that he's reaching to us. Even Paul said in Acts when he preached to the Areopagus, that cultural philosophical center in Athens, Greece, he said, he's not far from us. God is accessible. He's near. He wants to have a relationship because we are his creation. But keep in mind, God is, God acts, God speaks. Here's the truth that Tanner brought out so well in the messages, and that is, because he's relational, because he's created us to be the very image of who he is, to bear the image of who he is, relationship requires communication. Now, let me just underscore that for a second. I don't mean it to sound like just a sermon from last Sunday from me, but it doesn't matter if we're talking about friendships or marriages or any kind of relationship that we enter. A relationship requires communication. So this God who is and the God who acts is a God who speaks, because relationships require communication. And guys, from my perspective, I know it's pretty much basic, is that's what this book, this holy, sacred book is about. God's spoken. He has revealed himself. And so we get, as human beings, we get to benefit from a God who not only made us and who acts in this creation that he has designed and put together so intricately, but additionally, God speaks to us. And this book, this Biblos, Bible, holy book, is I believe the primary way, not the only way, but the primary way that God has spoken. And so I love it. I love the fact that I can appreciate, as God's son, you guys as God's sons, and our listeners as God's sons and daughters, know this, that the God who made us wants a relationship with us, has designed us capable of that, and he actually speaks. And so the Bible becomes his self-revelation to us, his communication.